social media report indicated that Egypt, the majority of Facebook users polled that agreed that Facebook was most effectively used to raise awareness of the causes and movements within the country. An excellent example of this creation was the Facebook group called Bir Khalid Said by the Google executive Logan, created to commemorate the brutal murder of young Egyptian blogger who died in the hands of police. The Facebook group quickly attracted over 500,000 members who spread the graphic photographs of the brutal atrocities against Said. Contention 2, the social media web allows quick organization of activists. Mobilizing information comes in 3 forms: identification, location, and tactics. Social media is an ideal venue for encountering all 3 types of mobilizing information. The mainstream news media, for instance, has limited capacity to transmit mobilizing information, as most journalistic operations perceive this type of content violate norms of neutrality. The dialogue taking place via Facebook, Twitter, and other S&Ms was used by the mainstream media as a source during the height of protests. Al Jazeera, in particular, relied on repeated bloggers and Twitter users during the uprising for real-time coverage of events, showing that oftentimes social media was at the forefront of events during the protests. An example closer to home is the Occupy Wall Street movement. Since its unusual origins, psychologists have tracked the spread of protests by means of social media and found that sites such as Facebook and Twitter have been essential organization locations for spreading information about Occupy Wall Street. Professor Neil Perrin goes on to explain, while the focus of Occupy Wall Street is on mobilizing individuals offline, online activities greatly facilitate these efforts. Facebook has become a recruiting tool for bringing in new supporters and getting people to events. In the light of these 2 contentions we presented and supported, it is clear that social media must have a positive effect on activism. Social media has been used and will continue to be used to great effect in spreading messages and getting people on the ground to demand for change. We strongly affirm social media activism does indeed have a positive effect on activism. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take our prep time. I'm making time. It's starting out. Go ahead, Varun. You're going to speak.
So
I think we're done with this. Since these are part-time, can I actually see you guys' second contention? Did you address it? A second? Your second? I want to see your second. Yeah, that's the thing. Just so the audience knows, that's the thing you can do.
Not necessarily, but
Not necessarily.
the social media web allows quick
Can I see
organization.
it? We can just go on the speech, I suppose. It is. Thanks.
Technically not, but
100% yes. I think so.
I'm just ready.
I think Logan's still using prep.
Go ahead. I'm not using prep time. I can take notes during this.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Logan, can you get that paper back by our next speech?
Sort of confused. They want to come inside.
You're good.
Okay. The Jenny Morozov once said, cyber utopians who believe the Arab Spring has been driven by social networks ignore the real world activism underpinning them. I believe in that philosophy, and throughout our contentions, I will elaborate on that. So our first contention is that social media harms the amount of aid that's distributed. Now, I don't have time right now to speak about that, but my partner here, the Logan James. We'll talk about that later. So moving on to our second contention is that social media is not the only form of communication and is not by far the best. Subpoint A. According to Golnaz Esnafadari of the Foreign Policy and Malcolm Gladwell of the New Yorker, simply put, there was no Twitter revolution inside Iran. The cadre of prominent bloggers like Andrew Sullivan, who championed the role of social media in Iran, misunderstood the situation. Western journalists who couldn't reach or didn't bother reaching people on the ground in Iran simply scrolled through the English language tweets post with hashtag Iran election, she wrote. Through it all, no one seemed to wonder why people trying to coordinate protests in Iran would be writing in any other language but Farsi, because they don't speak much English in Iran, they speak Farsi. Now, people like Andrew Sullivan claim that the use of social media, especially the faster-paced Twitter, were effective in protests in Iran. Upon a statistic provided by Tom Chatfield of The Guardian showing that about 20,000 people use Twitter in Iran. It seems unlikely that it spawned protests, as Drew, and I quote, Chatfield said, millions of protesters in 2009 in Iran. Furthermore, Golnaz says that these tweets were all in English and that Twitter users in Iran had to scroll through the tweets. And as I've said before, they don't speak much English there, so how would they see that? Subpoint B. There are negative consequences for activists. Avengii Morozov, a senior editor at the New Republic, argues that the West's reckless promotion of technological tools as pro-democratic agents has provoked authoritarian regimes to crack down on online activity in some style or the other. Not just closing down or blocking websites, but using social networks to infiltrate protest groups and track down protesters, seeding their own propaganda online, and generally out-resourcing and outsmarting their beleaguered citizenry. According to AleRibia.net, an Iran court has sentenced 8 people to death to jail terms ranging from 7 to 20 years for crimes including anti-regime propaganda posted on Facebook. That's what an opposition website said. These sentences were delivered last week, giving the Facebook users a combined 123 years in prison. Now, that's a lot of time, ladies and gentlemen. And that takes me to my rebuttal of their contentions. So they said that they mentioned a report called the Arab Social Media Report, but Arab governments' reactions to social media have given rise to a battle of the blogosphere, as proxies or other means are used to bypass government firewalls, only to have those efforts meet further government blocking. Government authorities in the region have also waged widespread crackdowns on bloggers, journalists, civil society, and human rights activists. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not safe to use social media because the government can just easily hack that social media site. And now, if we used another form of communication, such as words, it would be a lot harder for them to hack our words, because you can't do that, and find us. So, I urge a strong negation ballot. Thank you.
Is this over time?
No, this is
Oh.
fine, actually.
That's right. Okay, as the affirmation, first question. Frank.
Yep.
As the affirmation, I have a first question.
You may.
Do you believe that people are able to express their political opinions over social networking sites such as Facebook?
Yes, but in countries such as Iran, they're also persecuted for doing so. Now, I suggest other forms of doing that are not social media, because as I've said before, you can't hack words.
But throughout the whole world, Iran is one example. Can people express their opinions in other countries throughout the world?
Well, not in Moldova, where an identical thing happened.
How about the United States, where there's a majority of the internet users? or a
Well,
large portion?
Yes, we do live in a democracy, but I must remind you that the debate topic is about the whole world and not just the United States of
Yes,
America.
but there is a large portion of the people that use the internet in the United States, correct?
Yes, and it is decent in the United States,
And
but not everywhere.
do you believe that social networking can be used to facilitate activism?
In the United States, yes, but not in other countries because people are being prosecuted for using social networks, as I've cited in my case.
You stated that governments can hack social networking sites. Do you believe that a government, for say, can hack a site such as Facebook?
I do believe that because the Iranian government did that.
Hacked Facebook?
Yes, they did, and Twitter. Okay, I have a few questions for you, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Is it harder to retweet a hashtag, a make shift stand in okay, skip that. Does the term hashtag activism dilute the esteem of actual activists?
Can you repeat the question again?
Does the term hashtag activism dilute the esteem of actual activists?
I don't believe that the hashtag term activist dilutes the, I guess, the political context of activism, because remember that social media can be used to express your opinions online and spread those beliefs to other people throughout the world.
Okay, thank you. Another question, that's okay.
Okay.
Is social media a form of democratization?
I wouldn't say so. I would say that it can help facilitate, activism, but I wouldn't say it's a form of democratization.
And a third question.
Okay.
Is conflict between activist groups beneficial to producing damage? Is conflict between activist groups beneficial to producing change?
Well, we're just talking about facilitating activism and helping in that process. So when we're talking about social media, we're facilitating that process of activism. I have a question for you.
Okay.
So you stated that the Iran government was part of the Arab Spring, or Iran was part of the Arab Spring. We have evidence that Iran is not part of the Arab Spring.
Well, I didn't say they were. Okay, I would ask you to present the evidence, but I would also keep in mind that they were part of a more colloquial term called the Arab Spring, something that most of us know, and something more relevant to society as a whole.
Okay. You stated that social media is the only form of communication. However, how does social media not improve the process of activism?
I've not said that it's the only form of communication. I've said multiple times that we can talk.
It's the end of cross-examination. All right, everybody ready? All right, so to begin today, I'm going to go over a bit of what the negation has just said. First things first, their second contention, because their first was not elaborated on, social media is not the only form of communication and is not by far the best, does not actually directly negate the resolution. They're just saying that social media is not necessarily the best medium through which to facilitate change and spread information is what or communication rather, is what the contention is really about. And that's really not involved with the resolution because the resolution doesn't ask what the best means of communication is. An example I would like to present would be an example of shoes. Just because a pair of shoes is not the best pair of shoes that could possibly ever help you run does not mean that you should never ever wear a pair of shoes. So just by this example, we can already see that their second contention has no sway in this argument. Furthermore, my opponent has been pointing to several instances of a government cracking down on social media, specifically in the Middle East and Iran and all of these places. And what really this brings us to say is that the governments are cracking down on social media because social media has an effect on change. If social media did nothing in terms of causing change, if social media did nothing to spur revolutions, why would Iran want to crack down on it? Why would Iran go to all the trouble of hacking Facebook and Twitter to simply do something that doesn't actually cause change? So what my opponents are presenting is the fact that social media does cause change and that regimes are aware of this. We pointed out that Iran should not necessarily be considered as part of the Arab Spring because the revolution in Iran did not actually succeed. This may be, in part, because the government cracked down on social media. Again, an example of how social media works to bring about change. Another thing that we brought up in our case that was not refuted, and that really should be cause enough to end the round now and to really consider, or we'll let some people talk, but what should really be considered as the most important piece of evidence in today's debate is that social media has been found to spur political change. People who are involved with talking about politics on social media have been linked to also be people who go about and cause social change. This in itself is proof that social media has a positive effect on activism because activism is a direct action to cause desired change. Not having specifics on their first contention, there's not really much I can go over with it, but the amount of aid distributed is again not particularly relevant to this particular resolution. It's not about how much aid is going to be distributed, just as it's not about what form of communication is the best. It's about, does social media, one form of communication, benefit or detriment activism? And as the round stands now, you really have to see that that answer is a resounding yes. Furthermore, my opponent brought up in cross-examination #activism as taking away the esteem of activists or hurting the activists' feelings. I'm not really sure how this is going to negate the resolution, but the point is that it's not about whether or not activism is made to feel bad by #activism. It's about what is able to cause change and what is able to facilitate activism. Really, when deciding today's debate, what has to come down is, does social media facilitate activism? And as it stands, that answer is a resounding yes. Thus we affirm. Thank you. It's 4 minutes, right?
No. Okay, so just a quick off-time roadmap. First, I'm going to go through the reputations of the... They're 100% accepted. I'm going to go through the affirmations case. Then, I'm going to go over the negations case. And if time permits, I'm going to say some other things. So. Okay. Resolved. Social media has a positive effect on activism. Quote, Malcolm Gladwell said that we are swimming in knowledge but lacking in the understanding behind it. Now this quote rings especially true in our modern day and age when we as a society make actions without truly understanding what it is we are accomplishing. As the negation, we accept all of the affirmations definitions. We believe that they're completely acceptable and we can understand why they accepted them because they frame this debate in an intellectual and perfect way. But we do have one observation to make. As the negation, we don't have to prove today that social media is bad. We don't have to prove today that it has a bad effect on activism. All the negation has to do today is show that on balance, the net gains and losses from the use of social media doesn't benefit activism. In layman's terms, social media can have some good moments, but if these benefits don't outweigh the inherent harms of social media activism, the negation wins today's debate. Thus, it is the burden of the affirmation to prove, without a doubt, that social media has an overwhelming positive effect on activism. So moving into the negations, into the affirmations case. So first of all, our second contention meets their first contention completely. It refutes it. Our second contention was social media is not the only form of communication for activists and by far not the best. Basically what we're saying there is that there's other ways to get these messages out there. There's other ways for these people to communicate and to establish these goals. But they've given no reason why that is the excelsior reason, why it's the best reason, why it's the one that we have to choose above all else. And that's what the negation is saying today, is that we don't have to choose above all else, and there's other ways to fulfill these goals. This was in the Arab Spring, the Arab social media evidence that they brought up. And actually my partner forgot to mention it, but the Arab social media quote that he said was from the exact same evidence that they brought up. So the evidence that they brought up saying that, I don't know the specifics of the word, but it pertained to their first contention. Our quote for that is, our quote from the same source says that Arab governments' reaction to social media have given rise to a battle of the blog sphere, as proxies and other means are used to bypass government firewalls, only to have those efforts meet further government blocking. Now, government authorities in the region also have waged widespread crackdowns on bloggers, journalists, civil society, and human rights activists. Because of this inefficiency, we can't assume that this is the best system. We can't assume that this is the system that we must hold above all else. And because of that, we can't believe the negation's first contention. Now, our evidence from the University of British Columbia shows that their second contention is inherently not true. The evidence from the University of British Columbia says that we found that when consumers gave public support, they were no more likely to provide more meaningful support for the cause than if someone was just randomly asked for the larger request. So showing this support on social media websites, showing a like, showing a retweet, showing that you support it, as the affirmation said, showing your opinion on a social networking website miles away, in no way states that you go out there and make more change. It in no way states that it will promote activism. It doesn't promote change in any way. And this was from the University of the British Columbia. Now, the final refutation I have is this democratization argument. Now, the affirmation misconstrued the evidence, or it misconstrued the democratization argument in the first cross-examination. But what the democratization argument says is that when we decide to retweet or hashtag or whatever it will be, whatever our favorite activism movement is, we're essentially voting for those lives to be saved. And because we can't quantify human lives, because we can't quantify activist movements, we can't choose one movement over another. Because we're essentially saying your lives are more important. We, from our laptops, making our hashtags and our retweets, not in the battlefields, not in the hostile lands, are deciding that they are more important than somebody else. Now, why can we do that? Simple answer is we can't. For that reason alone, the negation should win today's debate. Now, moving into the affirmations, into the negation contentions. Social media harms the amount of aid that is distributed. It does this by removing an inherent moral obligation as a citizen of a cosmopolitan realm. And as I stated, this is the British Columbia evidence, meaning that people can remove their inherent moral obligation as a citizen of the universe from the realm of consciousness without actually committing any aid. They can make no change and still feel like they did, which reduces the amount of aid that's distributed and reduces the amount of aid that is delivered. Thank you. That is the end of my speech. And I urge a vote in the negation.
Before we continue, does anybody have an extra pen that I can borrow? Ran out of ink.
What's the time for the context?
3 minutes.
Is this grand cross-sex or just me?
No.
This is me, not this.
As the affirmation.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so can you explain why governments such as Iran would want to hack into Facebook and Twitter?
Well, see, the reason that they would want to so that they can promote their corrupt regimes, the reason they would want to hack into Facebook or Twitter, or more commonly address policy questions so that they can limit the proxy servers. So
then is it dangerous to post your political opinion on Facebook or Twitter?
I would say it is dangerous to post your political opinion on Facebook or Twitter if you are in an area in which the government has
so
the ability
in those areas, is it dangerous to post your political opinion on Facebook or Twitter?
I would say yes. Can I ask you a question? Sure. So does making a retweet in, let's say, our country, or posting something on your Facebook status in our country, affect aid in any way in another country?
Well, in theory it could. However, that's not really the
Sir,
scope
this is a yes or no question, just for clarification.
Well, it's a question that involves situations.
It's a question that's a yes or no question.
It's a question that can refer to several thousand.
All right, we'll move on to another question.
Okay, to clarify, though, this is a question that can involve several thousand people.
Do you agree that we can't quantify
Some of them, for some of them, the answer could be a yes, and for some of them, the answer could be a no. So it's impossible to really
So
represent
this is a
what
cross-examination.
thousands
Do
of
we ask
people
questions
on.
or do we have our own speeches?
Well, you asked me a question.
I did. That's why I'm asking you another question.
All right.
Do you agree that we cannot quantify human life?
I would agree, but that's not really relevant to this discussion.
So you agree that we can't quantify human life. So then how can you agree that we should post our opinions and we should post our activist movement, which we hold higher than anybody else, and decide that those people get to live,
Okay,
and these
activism.
people, the majority of people, don't get to live?
What you're doing right now is attacking the notion of activism, and that's not really what the debate
No,
is
what
about.
I'm doing
The
right
debate
now is
is
attacking
about
the notion of
what
applying social media
activism
to
is gonna
activism.
be.
Because I'm
So,
showing you that social media
How
has a
can we
negative effect to
facilitate
activism.
activism is really the question that we have to be asking ourselves.
Question.
Yeah, how does the arbitrary value of human life, what does that have to do with specific activism action?
Well, the value of human life is important because we can't quantify human life. We can't decide that one life is more important.
But
We
how
can't
is that
decide
relevant
these
to
people-
activism?
That's
Let's say
relevant.
my cause causes
relevant.
saving the dolphins.
No,
Why is that relevant?
No, you're misconstruing. This is relevant to the resolution.
The resolution regards activism,
That's
which is
time.
not exclusive.
We'll take our prep now. Whatever it is. Do you have the time? What did you time us for our last prep?
Oh, no. I was just being silly.
Okay,
I think we
so
actually
we're
agreed that
done.
we weren't going to use prep in this debate.
Okay, well, then we don't have to use prep.
There are three main reasons why you should vote for the affirmation in today's round. We have demonstrated that social media has the ability to quickly mobilize activists. We demonstrated that social media allows the spreading of ideas and information. First of all, we have demonstrated that social media has improved the process of activism. This is a key part in today's round. Their opponents stated that this debate is weighted on the fact whether people can have an overwhelming net benefit on activism. However, we demonstrated that the use of social media further demonstrates that we are able to decrease all of these political ties. They demonstrated that governments have the ability to take over social media. However, we don't believe this argument is true at all. We have shown that governments can't take over social media as large as Facebook and Twitter. We show that if people are able to express their political views on online social medias, they're able to communicate to others around the world. We believe that this is an important argument because they're showing awareness towards others. This is a key part in today's round because we're showing that social media is able to facilitate towards the problem of activism. If we have used all of these arguments and we have showed that social media can improve all of these things, then we believe that you should vote for the affirmation. Thank you.
It's ready. Logan. I would thank you for all being here today, but let's skip those pleasantries and get to the debate at hand. So they have not mentioned the democratization principle that I and my partner have brought up today, and I must say that both of their contentions are met by the democratization arguments that we've presented, as Logan so eloquently said in his speech. And they are showing good movements from social media applied to activism, that those provided shows a net loss in benefits to a cause because of poor social media. Also, Ryan said in his summary statement or speech that the government can't take over Facebook or Twitter. But I said in my speech that they hacked Facebook and Twitter and Iran. So clearly a government, while they can't take over a social media network, they can do the equivalent of that by hacking it and looking at who's posting what. So that rebuts their claim. And before I stop speaking, I would like to go over some of my contentions that I've talked about before. Now, as Logan elaborated on further, social media is not the only form of, well, that's what I said. I said that social media is not the only form of communication and is not by far the best. And I still believe that. And I think Logan eloquently rebutted their points, rebutting my points. And I still believe those arguments hold true in this debate. And also, Logan said that social media harms the amount of aid that's distributed, and he proved that. And that's something we need to keep in mind. And when voting today, I would urge you all to stand in the firmest negation of this, because social media hurts activism. Thank you. Please vote.
Grand House, this is 2 minutes. For our resident hub photo expert.
So as the affirmation that we have for question. Sure. So, Varun, would you say that Logan was eloquent in his last speech? Okay, so moving on to the actual debate. Again, the question keeps arising on my mind that why do governments want to hack Facebook and Twitter, as you say they have, if they have no effect on activism?
Are you saying, is this a question?
Well, this is a question to you as well.
Well, basically, governments want to crack down onto these advocates and these people on social networking so that they can prevent the level at which it can affect. There is a level where social media can affect. But here's the thing: there's a timeline gap that you're misconstruing in your evidence, which is the fact that the governments are currently locking down means that there's no action in it besides a democratization argument. Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
You stated that you agree we can't quantify human life, but yet you still push for this social media outlet, this way to choose who we believe is the more worthy of life, evidently. Can you explain your reasoning
Okay,
behind that?
activism is direct action to cause desired change. You yourself called those, you said that this definition was intellectual and perfect. So when we're looking at what activism is, we have to see what will facilitate activism, not necessarily the moral imperative of preserving human life, which is unquantifiable in my opinion. But when activism is direct action to cause desired change, we have to look at who is creating these actions. Not necessarily the ramifications, but does social media have a positive effect on activism? Whether we like that particular
So I've got another question. Is this one of those good moments that I was talking about? Those times where social media can be beneficial, but on the whole, on balance, the net benefits will be outweighing into the loss of quality of human life.
The net benefits will outweigh to the loss of human life. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, well, essentially what I'm saying is that net benefits is a term that is used for when you want to determine whether or not something is morally correct. And so when I'm saying that the net benefits will qualify social media to be used or not.
As it might sound, can we agree that this is a debate not about the specific morality of the actions, but whether social media has a positive effect on
And yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Improving the process.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about social media. Its net benefits, the two contentions that you stated, your first two contentions. I'm saying that yes, I completely accept them. But that's the thing. In my first observation, I stated that it doesn't matter.
When your partner says that you have refuted these contentions, doesn't that clash with you saying that you just accepted them?
What did you say?
Your partner stated that he refuted both of the contentions with the democratization principle. You're saying that you accept
What I'm saying is your contentions are irrelevant.
Irrelevant to
I'm saying your contentions are irrelevant because of the first observation that states that good moments can exist in social media. They can happen. It doesn't matter. We don't have to prove as the negation that
So then
social media
can
can't
social
have a
media
positive
have a
effect.
positive
What we
effect
have
on
to prove as the negation, is that the net losses outweigh the net benefits. And because you provided no refutations to our list of net losses, we win the net benefits argument, and thus
Can you go
win the
over
debate.
actual specific net losses?
Net losses? Yeah, sure. That's our entire case. Did you?
You
do you want me to? I don't know if we have
I was
time.
talking
I actually think we're at time.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, everybody ready? Yes. All right, so in concluding today's debate, I understand that a lot has been said, and a lot of raised voices have been raised. However, we have to look at what facilitates activism. That was the very beginning of this debate. That was the framework that we as the Affirmation set up, and they as the Negation accepted. What facilitates activism? And we say social media has a positive effect on activism in that it facilitates activism. Now, they're talking about net benefits, net losses, but when they're talking about these net benefits and net losses, despite the fact that some of their net losses, and rather most of their net losses, haven't been resolutional, their net losses are referring to things that are not activism as an action. Their net losses are referring to things that have happened as a result of a particular activist cause. Their net losses have been the government recognizing that social media has a positive effect on activism and wanting to crack down on that. Their net losses have been many that do not actually involve activism. What we're talking about is what facilitates activism as a thing in itself. And we have shown that activism helps spread ideas and information. We have shown that social media webs allow the quick organization of activists. Neither of these contentions are met by either of their two contentions. Their two contentions, in fact, don't even negate this resolution, because while social media might not be the best form of communications, as the shoes I'm wearing might not be the best pair of shoes, neither of those have anything to do with whether or not shoes or social media are good for running or activism. And their first contention, again, is about aid distribution and not about activism in a thing in itself. So, when we look at the resolution, which is, in the end, what this debate has to be decided on, social media has a positive effect on activism. There is only one way to go, and that is to affirm. Thank you. I understand if you want to take the remaining. 2 minutes, right? Everybody ready? Want to run? I said partner, but we're on time now. So, the first and most important thing to this debate is the democratization argument. The democratization argument is the leading net loss to the net benefits argument that we're talking about. Now, the reason we're talking about net benefits is because we agree. We agree that we should have to look at what facilitates activism the most. And when we look at what facilitates activism the most, we have to take into account the negative that comes from the way we facilitate activism and the positive that comes from the way we facilitate activism. The Affirmation has presented two contentions that are positively benefiting activism. What I'm saying is that those don't matter. And they don't matter because of one net loss. One net loss out of 3 net losses that we provided. The one net loss that what I'm talking about is the democratization argument. The idea that we can't choose, and he agreed, we can't choose one human life over another. And when we decide on our social media outlets, when we decide on Twitter, on Facebook, use a hashtag, retweet, whatever, we are choosing one life over another. So for that reason alone, the negation should win today's debate. Now, moving into another very important part in deciding who's the winner of today's debate. The observation that I made in the very beginning, in my very first speech. Their contentions hold no merit because they don't contextualize why those are more important. Why they are more important than net losses they were provided. Not only have they not provided any refutations to our net losses besides saying they're not resolutional, but who's to say they're not resolutional? That's a claim without a warrant and not a very good argument. Basically what this is saying is that because they haven't provided any reason that it should be overwhelmingly the best option, why it should be the best running shoes, because that's something that they had to do according to the observation in the first contention, according to the observation that they agreed to, they should lose today's debate. And the final thing, we agreed to look at what facilitates activism. Now we are saying that it doesn't facilitate activism because on the whole, social media has a more negative effect on activism than the positive effects that they have presented. Their contentions are great, but they're not enough. And that's why the negation wins today's debate.